Now we're recording. Welcome, welcome to Starburst, Speculative Sundays poetry readings for Women's History Month. Sunday, March 9th, 2025, first day of EDT. We are live on Facebook via Zoom. I am Akua Leslie Hope, speaking to you from the ancestral land of the Onondaga, also known as the Seneca, keepers of the Western Door in the southern Finger Lakes region of New York State. I pay homage to the Seneca, past, present, and future, as I do to my own ancestors, by whose grace I exist and am sustained. The series is made possible in part by the Artist Development Grant Program administered by the Arts Council of the Southern Finger Lakes and funded by the Community Foundation of Elmira Corning and the Finger Lakes Incorporated. It was later funded in part by poets and writers with public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the New York State Legislature. And this year, the Statewide Community Regrant Program, a regrant program of the New York State Council on the Arts with support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature and administered by the Arts Council of the Southern Finger Lakes, enables us to be here. This reading is being recorded, so if you've got concerns, please keep your camera off, although we enjoy seeing you should you choose. Inaugurated in September 2020, the series seeks to remediate the lack of presentations of speculative poetry by its living creators. Now in its sixth year, the Speculative Sundays poetry reading series has presented 41 hour-long events, including 54 poet readings. What is speculative poetry, you might ask? Speculative poetry, ancient of days, older than the flood. The poetry of possibilities centers the imagined as real. The first recorded human literature was speculative verse. Gilgamesh, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Iliad and Odyssey, and Beowulf are ancient exemplars. Speculative poetry includes alternate history, astropoetry, cryptid, cyberpunk, dystopian, fabulism, fairy tales, fantasy, folklore, futurism, horror, magic, monsters, mythology, occult, paranormal, robot, science fiction, shifters, slipstream, solar punk, solar funk, space opera, superheroes, supernatural, sword and sorcery, sword and soul, steampunk, time travel, post-apocalyptic. Oh, solar punk, forgot about that. And weird. It takes all poetic forms plus one called sci-fi coup. So from nursery rhymes to Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, from Puff the Magic Dragon to Zombie Jamboree, we've all recited and sung speculative poetry. Tonight's magnificent poet, shy and nocturnal, Jennifer Crow has never been photographed in the wild, but it's rumored that she lives near a waterfall in Western New York. Her work has appeared in a number of print and electronic venues, including Uncanny Magazine, Asimov Science Fiction, The Wondrous Real, and Analog Science Fiction. Her short poem, Harold and the Blood-Red Crayon, was a co-winner of the 2023 Rhysling Award from the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association. Curious readers can catch up with her on Bluesky. Welcome, welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Akua, for including me in this. It is always an honor to take part. And thank you also to all the organizations that have helped make this possible. I know that this is a tough time for everybody. So to be encouraged and supported in this way is so meaningful. A lot of what I'm going to read tonight is from a collection I've been working on putting together called Fairy Tales for Angry Children. And it grew out of my realization at a fairly late point in life that all the things I hated about myself and all the things that had been criticized were things that could be linked to growing up in a household with extremely controlling and angry and narcissistic parents. And that how I'd framed myself as a bad person was not the truth, or definitely not the whole picture. And so I've been reframing my entire existence, my entire experience as a human being. And one of the things that has really helped me with that is going back to the fairy tales that I loved as a child, because I'm realizing now that those fairy tales were the point of entry for me to begin understanding myself. So to start with, here is Fairy Tales for Angry Children. Don't forget, true hearts win in the end. Don't forget that wicked relatives can lose, even when they aren't forced to dance in hot shoes until the devil drags them down to hell. Too often you read a few paragraphs of the story, listen to the prologue, and think that's all you'll get. Just hunger and pain until wolves circle and gnaw your bones. But if you turn a page or two, recognize a wolf can be a friend, a talking bird can lead you to treasure, a hidden door always waits when you find a dead end. If your parents taught you that anger is wrong, remember the wise writer who said, "We must stay angry, for righteous rage can save when all else fails. Let fierce anger sustain you until the change when the denouement means a feast among friends, a secret revealed to all who turned away." The second poem ties into that, and it was inspired in part by my granddaughter visiting for Christmas, and she liked going down and exploring in the basement with her mom and her grandpa. And then after they left, I kept finding little sparkles of glitter in all the nooks and crannies in the basement, which I find hilarious, but also very apt for this child. And I thought about basements in my own experience growing up. And I wrote, "After you lost your way." No one warned you the road to hell passes through your parents' basement. Dingy, low, cobwebbed, and shadow haunted. You can imagine any bad thing happening here. And some bad things did. You spent a few decades lodged somewhere between the chest freezer and the water heater, bouncing from guile to grace, keening in darkness and praying for release. Freedom eluded you. There is always another cellar, cement spalling from rock walls, spiders watching from corners. It took you 50 years to turn and look for a sliver of light at the top of the stairs. It took you half a life to claim what was already yours. Bodies buried beneath broken concrete belong to no one or everyone, depending on the century. You have no dead husbands here, only decayed illusions. You built your own house, board by board, creating a better version of the old, not perfect, but safer, where a child can hide if she wants, or climb up to the kitchen and savor a cup of cocoa and a dream. Dank basement corners now host glints of glitter, where a brave, bright girl passed through on her way to other places where she will also belong. The next poem is called False Histories. You're not hungry, they say, as they lead you into the forest. They will claim you know how to turn straw into gold and blame you for whatever befalls you after. Everything you thought you were turns out to be false, constructed narratives designed to comfort everyone else. You were never supposed to notice, not allowed to argue, forbidden from seeing the truth writ large on the world. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the lie. You were never meant to own their misery, and your heart leads you to the story you're meant to have. These next two poems, I wanted to read you both of them because they're very interlinked in ways that I was not expecting until I reread them for this reading. They're both linked to the Snow White fairy tale, but with slightly different takes on the wicked stepmother, wicked queen version of the story. The first is called Plying the Strands. Stitches cast in red, red blood, linen wrinkled in her grip, thread wound sunwise, then widdershins, to break the natural tendencies of wool and lock the fibers in place. She jabs the fabric, motions brisk, even violent, and mutters over the resulting picture, half finished, faces made with eyes, but no mouths. She likes silence in her solar, watchful servants moving on soft feet, their hands appearing in the periphery of her vision, hesitant, tremulous. She begins a row of chain stitches, black as cold iron, thread pulled taut to keep it from knotting, and keeps a pin pinched between her lips, like the secrets she binds in the cloth. I love stitchery of all kinds, and I imagined the queen working on this project and how it reflects her existence and what she wants in life. And then I wrote another poem called An Iron Ring, and I didn't realize I used the same first line in both and some very similar imagery that goes in a different direction. So this is An Iron Ring. Stitches cast in red, red blood, on linen smooth as the first snow of winter. That is how the story goes, and yet it is not the whole story, because the needle weaves into flesh, and the fabric of the body bears scars, and the ring sits cold on a crooked finger, knocking against a knobbed knuckle, chiming against glass, rapping like the warning beak of a bird on the stone surface of a table. It is not the old story, because light reveals bloodstains, locked in wood grain and crevice, and the heroine sharpens her scissors on a whetstone and whispers stories to herself of embroidered patterns on the skin of the world, ice on windows and in hearts. She puts on the ring, savoring the cold solidity of iron that encompasses all she might be and all she means to leave behind. This next one is particularly dear to my heart. I wrote it for my sister-in-law, who has been struggling with severe health issues for quite some time now. And she and I have had a similar journey in leaving our old faith that we grew up in and striving to find where we belong when we've left that particular part of our existence behind. So I wrote this for her. It's called Last of the Birch Girls. We've been told that pruning makes for a stronger tree, but in truth, we cut to bend another living thing to our will, preserve the view, enhance the harvest, make room for something better, costlier, bigger. Every slice into our heart's flesh carves away something solely ours to make way for the needs of others, or to pare down our outsized desires to something small and comfortable, able to fit into a garden made by someone else's God. Every raw wound weeps, clear sap trickling like a spring freshet, the arms I would have held open, cut off at the shoulder. The last of the birch girls cannot run, but root touches root across the forest, warning treekin to beware the humans and their disfiguring ambitions. I love geology of all kinds, and I'm fascinated by the way that Earth has changed over billions of years and the way that mountains rise and fall. I learned a new word, orogeny. It's a noun, a process by which a section of the Earth's crust is folded and deformed by lateral compression to form a mountain range. I sit in the shadow of the Appalachians and contemplate slow pressure, eons of agony, how much a plate of Earth's surface must weigh to cause buckling thousands of feet high. Once the land here rose taller even than my other favorite mountains to the west. The silt washed from their erosion to bury creatures in a shallow sea, where I find their fossils, hundreds of millions of years in the future. Sometimes I buckle too. Mortality and disappointment and failure pushing up from beneath the surface of my existence. Sometimes I wonder how high I can hope to rise, or if I will end up subsumed, subdued, a secret rage bubbling below and waiting to erupt. My mountains, even the youngest, older than I can grasp, betray evidence of ancient disasters in their faces. Glaciers scraping and wearing, earthquakes slip striking and burying old stories, layers like books if the books had been dropped in bathtubs, left resting with spines broken, torn in two, with a different tail stuck between. My own story is like that, interrupted and shattered, pieced together by forces stronger than defeat. I am a mountain dressed in flesh, my bones made of minerals that last. One of the things I love about poetry is inspiration comes in so many different places. And this poem was inspired by a statue. I don't remember the artist, but it's similar in some ways to, the twee kind of statues you see sometimes of children. But this girl was standing with her skirts a little bit raised, and beneath her skirts, these two wolves were emerging from either side of her. And I found that picture, that image, so fascinating, and it fit in perfectly with my fairy tale love. So I had to write a poem about that, and I called it "The Wolf Beneath." None of the men stopped to ask why this girl child, thin and pale, her hair braided, and her dress thin, as if she'd outworn it as much as outgrown it. None asked why her parents let her roam the wood after dark, why she walked barefoot with her pointed chin thrust out, her gaze level and cool as a plateau in the mountains. No, they took her for a fool, a weakling, a victim, and they circled her with their tongues out, their every breath heated. And for a moment, they believed they'd won when she plucked at her skirts and drew them up to her knees. Gloated until they heard the scratch of clawed toes on a hard-packed path and heard the ragged breath of hungry, hunting creatures and saw shadows rising up from beside her thighs, saw them for a moment, pointed ears and muzzles, before they leapt on the men and taught them about caution and regret. So speaking of inspiration, this next poem came from listening to an episode on NPR about the dangers of wildfires growing greater as climate change picks up speed, and how, as humans, we often move species from a place where they're suited to places where they're unsuited. And the person in the story talked about the little arson grasses that are growing in so many places where a drier and hotter climate will not be good for them. And that line, little arson grasses, just stuck with me. If you love me, you will burn. Put your cheek against mine and feel the heat my bones release into the world. We plant ourselves in dry soil and gather water from every deep and shallow source. And our thirst grows like the weeds between rows of corn. And the river sinks below the stones of its banks. And the little arson grasses we brought from cooler climes parch and kindle, only a lightning strike away from inferno. Blue hills rise and ripple through the smoke. I wonder how the world can breathe. Imagine I smell burning, even here, miles above the conflagration. Deep valleys look almost reddish, hints of blood, of doom, coiling skyward, as a child screams ragged and raw in this airborne tube, the craft of men diminished against the face of destruction. I saw the trees dying years ago on a drive through miles of dry mountain passes. New disaster could wait a little while, but probably not a lifetime. Snowpack dwindles to nothing, but even now, fields of green circles spring up wherever the rugged terrain allows, as if we can't rest until every scrap of land flinches in our grip. And we imagine ourselves gods from our vantage in the sky, and not children. Children in our greed and waste, infants in our understanding. Fallow lands bake under unforgiving skies. We have scraped everything we can from the surface of our world, polluted it and called it progress. But the band between it and us has stretched too tight, and the snap will reverberate forever. Still, we tell ourselves the story ends differently for us. The rules erased, just this one time. If I love you, I will burn. And once I believed fire was the heart of romance, but now I wait for rain with my hands outstretched and know the story ends in ash forever. One of the things I love in poetry is taking inspiration from other people. And so my friend Sheila, who's here tonight, helped inspire this one. But it's also for my son, my younger son has ADHD, and it has been a struggle for him in a lot of ways. And it was a struggle for us to learn to understand who he was and what he needed to be comfortable in his life and to be able to accomplish all that he wanted to. And so for him, one of the poems I wrote is called Taking the Goblin to Market. Nothing will fit your goblin right. Pants too tight in the seat, too loose in the waist, too many pockets or too few, the colors all wrong, the fabric scratchy and stiff, or else so thin and cheap you can't imagine him wearing it for more than a day before holes appear like magic. And shirts, more of the same and worse. Sleeves flapping, eyes rolling, and sighs like a dragon stirring in its sleep. You lean against the counter of an elf's booth full of homemade boots and socks stitched from cobwebs, and your gaze meets sympathy in a leaf green stare. Shrug, and the elf will chuckle like wind stirring the surface of a quiet lake. And when your goblin finally emerges in his new finery, ready to set out on a grand adventure, you happily trade your gold for the perfect outfit marking the beginning of a new life. Sometimes I just like to write poems that are jokes. And this next one is very much a joke, mostly. It's called Cryptids of the Tortured Poets Department. Long after hours, when even the lowliest adjunct has closed her laptop and put on comfortable shoes and made her way to the subway station, cryptids creep out of the shadows and make this forgotten corner of the college their own. No Sasquatch or Yeti. Even the jackalope refuses to lower himself to appear. But still, the halls crowd with raucous, raven-headed girls plucking shiny objects from trash cans, and quiet women with the gentle stepping hooves of deer. Tiny fae, like bundles of brittle sticks, gather around a bulletin board where a taller fairy makes a crown out of announcements on colored paper about band gigs and gaming clubs, and a poet's circle where young women practice crying over something which is not young men. Nessie has been spotted in the duck pond below the department head's window, water and algae making her too slick to capture. Ghosts avoid the Tortured Poets Department, mostly. But every so often, a cold spot near the water fountain reminds everyone that death, too, is a woman everyone would rather forget. And the spirit's wails thrum in counterpoint to an iambic heartbeat pulsing from old radiators. Every year at Halloween, I send out a couple of spooky poems to everyone who wants one. And this year, one of the poems I wrote was called Cold Fury. And I was thinking about anger and the different manifestations it has. So this is Cold Fury. Wrath of the living burns, a devouring inferno, a wave of caustic acid, a hunger to scrape every last morsel of hope from doomed bones. Dead souls seethe with winter's icy bite, a hatred distilled to chill dregs dripping like icicle melt. Sometimes rage runs, and sometimes it waits. You may fear flames for their quick menace, but a hard freeze brings a death as sure and leaves your body as a monument, blue-tinged face, forever screaming, forever silenced. A couple of years ago, my daughter, who is a great maker of things, both knitting and crocheting, but also designing, wanted to go to a wool and fiber festival in Eastern New York. And she talked her dad into taking us all out there, her family and us, so that we could explore and so that I could also check out the cool yarn, of which there was a lot. But I also had fun in the book tent because they had lots of books about crafting and patterns. And one of the books I picked up was a book called Kreeft by Alexander Langlands. Kreeft is spelled similar to craft, but it's the Old English version of the word. And as Langlands explains in his book, our modern idea of craft is, hobbies and, making little knickknacks and whatever, is not as deep as the old view of Kreeft, which is about being a part of this natural world that you're in and using the resources with care and thoughtfully in order to build an environment that works for you but doesn't harm the things around you. And I found his book a really powerful musing on the ways that we have often kind of wandered away from the strengths of crafting. I like to say that if people felt free to create, not just writing, but building things and crafting things, we would have a healthier society, because there's something deeply healing in building things of all sorts. So I wrote this poem, Kreeft, in honor of that book. We find magic in ordinary movements, the steady in-out of a needle and thread, the warp and weft of a loom, the way flour and yeast, sugar and salt become bread in the oven, a scent like a living god rising from the kitchen. We turn yarn into clothing, wood into walls, stone into boundaries, seeds into gardens full of bees and vegetables. Kreeft speaks to a deep knowledge of the world, a fire sparked with flint and steel, a well dug to cool, pure water, a path paved with hewn rock, a roof over our heads, and a solid floor beneath our feet. More than that, Kreeft tells us that we are a part of all existence, our breath joined with all other creatures, our bones made from the bones of the land. And I'm really grateful I stumbled across that book, because I learned a lot from it. I don't think I'll ever thatch my own roof, but if I do need to, I can at least entertain that possibility. I had to look up the pronunciation of Kreeft, because I'd never heard it said aloud before. And the next poem, I also had to look up the pronunciation of the title, which is Hiraeth. And that's a Welsh word that refers to homesickness for, your place of belonging. My brother posted a meme about that word and its meaning. And I know that as much as he loves certain things about living in Wyoming, he misses Maine, and he misses the landscape and the places he knew there. And so I wrote this poem for him. So this is for my brother, Tom. Hiraeth. What is our longing but a flickering candle, a hollow in the pit of the stomach, a voice half heard in the wind as it cries in the treetops? We speak of hills, of stones, of pine and oak, and the hush of deep snow. And when we inhale deeply, the scent of resin and salt water rises in our hearts like mercury, the barometric pressure of our solitude increasing. Clear skies ahead, with our past a shadow on the horizon. Turn and return. We murmur stories to our children and their children. Grief, the thunderclap of a summer storm, as the sky turns blue-black and rain blurs the world. We never forget the place that made us, the wild granite landscape solid underfoot, even in dreams. Another thing about my brother is he's really into genealogy, and he has found a number of really interesting things about our ancestors. He thinks we may be descendants of the Irish pirate Grace O'Malley. He's found that 2 of our relatives died on a ship called the Dash, which was involved in a very unfortunate race right during the War of 1812, and a storm blew up and it sank. And ever after, it's been said that the Dash will sail into Portland Harbor at a time when bad things are happening. So I'm kind of wondering if we're going to see the Dash sometime soon. That would be interesting. But I tell people that you can learn a lot about my family from the fact that both of my parents are descended from women who were jailed during the Salem witch trials. My dad's side, it was a woman who was an accuser, and then it spun back on her, and she ended up in jail. On my mom's side, the woman's name is Susanna Martin, and she was actually one of the women hanged in Salem. And I've thought a lot about her because I feel like ornery women is kind of a thread in my life. And I want to be an ornery woman to a certain extent. So I came across this title when I was reading Shakespeare a couple of years ago, where one of the stage directions for a play was Enter Rumor, painted full of tongues. And this person would be taking the part of Rumor. And their outfit would be all covered with tongues, and they would rush in onto the stage. So this is Enter Rumor, painted full of tongues. Rumor prances on soft-clad feet, a whisper dancing from house to house, while truth settles its debts in the workhouse, dressed in rags. Rumor's gaudy costume flutters, and it carries enticing scents in its wake. Chocolate and grilled meats and perfumes that conjure evenings full of bustle and good cheer. You have heard the flapping of Rumor's tongues as a brisk breeze catches at Hem's billowing tails. No one recalls where Rumor went by the time its stories spread to cast shadows over lives. Maybe my ancestor somehow deserved her fate. Not a witch in the sense of a contract with the devil signed in blood, but guilty of wrath or greed, impatience, or simply knowledge of her neighbors' lives, of herbs and poultices and tisanes. Always a woman bears the blame as she bears the children, swelling under the gazes of judging men, weary of feigning obedience when she can threaten illness or harm and force power to bend a knee to her. I can guess why Rumor chose to make an example of her, its poisoned tongue salivating for the chance to purge society of its awkward outsiders, its women who find ways around the rules of men. So as we near the end here, I wanted to go back to the fairy tale poems. One of the fairy tales that has always fascinated me is Hansel and Gretel. And it's only now as I'm older that I realize that the image of a parent or parents abandoning their children, leaving them in the forest and thinking that things will turn out better that way, really resonates with me in deeper ways than I would have expected as a young child. And I think of how too often we expect of children wisdom that they aren't ready to produce. You know, that if you're seen as a smart or a clever child, or that you get along well with others, that somehow you understand the deeper things that is more for adults. And if adults don't teach you, then you have no way of knowing on your own what the meaning of things is. And so you can run into gingerbread houses in the woods and not understand the dangers that you're facing. And that was the idea behind A Taste of Sweetness. In a dark wood, wandering children seek breadcrumb truth, scattered and devoured. These children with empty bellies plead to a silent heaven for direction. Sinless, they trudge down trails that fade into the landscape and cross icy streams that flow from mountain fastnesses and flee shadows, some of which are only tree branches stirred by the wind, and some of which are wolves. So if these lost children were to find a house made of cookies and sugar glass and obvious whimsy, they would lack the wisdom to see a trap dressed in royal icing. No one is born a victim or a meal, but soon after the midwife cleans our screaming faces, lessons begin to build us into children who hunger, who long for a taste of sweetness, who will dare the witch's lair in hopes of breaking off a piece of dream and swallowing it whole before anyone notices the crumbs on our lips and demands a reckoning or justification. This is one of my creepy poems next. This one was published in Heroic Fantasy Quarterly a little while ago. It's called A Woman Dressed in Bones. Her gown rattles with every step, shadows settling like the memory of flesh on curves of ash and ivory, and horn-crowned skulls which rest on her shoulder and watch empty-eyed as she walks through abandoned palaces and forgotten mausoleums. The train of her dress hisses against barren earth and scrapes like sharp nails on stone, and she recalls the stories old women whispered in the pews of a cold cathedral, while the men droned on with their endless demands for obedience and fertility. Some goddesses know that birth marks another kind of death, where doom cracks open the pelvic girdle and splits flesh apart like an overripe fruit, and ghosts form in ranks beside and behind their queen as she glides to her doom, the poisoned cake dripping with honey, blade hidden in a swaddling of silk. I've been so glad to have the opportunity to share poems with you, and I saved this one for last. Right now, I think a lot of us are facing fear and concern for the future. And there's a lot to fight, but I think there's also a lot worth fighting for. And I don't want to forget that art is one of those things that make life worth living and make connections. I was talking to my son about writing, and I said, all art is a conversation. We're talking to each other about things that we believe and things that are beautiful and things that move us. And so preserving art is one of the things we can do to fight tyranny. And with that, this is A Dark Forest is Not the Worst Place. You awaken under a gnarled oak, branches curve downward into a green bower, and roots cradling you on a bed of moss. A gray bird swoops, singing words in a foreign language, and sunlight dapples the path. You do not remember arriving here, only the crisp scent of a cool morning and a dull ache in your limbs. When you stand, you find a pack filled with cheese and hard bread, dried fruits, and a bottle of water that tastes like freedom. A dark forest is not the worst place to find yourself or lose yourself. If you don't mind a wolf or three, if you can establish a truce with biting insects and scrounge enough berries and mushrooms to sustain yourself, then you might make that dark forest your home, wander in it, or build a lair in a cave. Learn the woods' ways by heart as seasons blur into one another, day by day and moon by moon. A dark forest is not the worst place to find yourself, for you can always stop and rest with your back against a sturdy tree and wait for the enchanted bird to lead you to the story that awaits you.
Wow. Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
That was so, we went on such a fabulous journey.
I tried to take you all over the world and a little bit beyond there too.
You did. You did indeed. Oh my gosh, Jennifer. This is a very different to my ear set of concerns, set of engagements, set of explorations, much more nature focused, natural world focused, and to a certain point, the tools you were using in terms of within the poem seemed different to me, or maybe I just didn't remember. A lot more alliterative verse, a lot more song and singing as you engaged and rewrote and recast, resewed, reknit, respun, crocheted these tales into psychological and emotional landscape. It was just, well, people say magnificent. And yeah, I love that too. The water that tastes like freedom. And you had mentioned the enchanted bird before. Are there any questions for Jennifer? Because I, of course, have some, but I invite the audience to both comment in the chat, which I will share out loud, and or raise their hand and ask their questions themselves. Denise says the sinister and often savage nature of fairy tales is great fodder for poetry. I love these poems. And Harold and the Blood-Red Crayon, the award winner, is one of her very favorites.
Thank you so much. That was such a fun poem to write, and I wrote it very intentionally as an homage to one of the books that was a favorite of my kids when they were little. And I was just like, can I do a horror slant on this? That would be fun to play with. This little child has such a rich imagination, and everything turns out well in the end. But some of the things that happen to him could be kind of alarming if you looked at it from a slightly different angle. So, I think you're right about sinister and savage. I think we're realizing that the world we live in has sinister and savage elements that maybe we were a bit protected from in some ways, and now we're confronting how easy it is for that veneer of safety and comfort and things moving smoothly is. And obviously, within our society, there's levels of privilege, and some people are much closer to the danger areas than others. But now we're seeing how easily we can all fall into that danger area. That's none of us is immune from that. And so I think that has powered a lot of my recent poems. I appreciated Akua's points, and I think my poetry writing has changed a lot in the past few years, both from the point of view of trying to understand myself better. But one of the things I've been doing on my Patreon every month is reading a collection of poems or an anthology of different poets, and writing about what those poets are doing and how they're approaching the art. And, obviously you don't want to copy other people, but you can look at what they're doing and see, oh, wow, this person is using a lot of alliteration, or, they're playing with rhyme in interesting ways. One time, Claire Cooney commented that she had written a ghazal, and I never tried one before, so I had to go look it up, and I'm like, I'm going to do that. And, so there's that conversation there. We inspire each other, we find ways to learn from each other. And when I was younger, I was much more arrogant of a writer. When you're like the only poet in your high school, everyone thinks that that's really amazing and cool. And I mean, it is amazing and cool, but you're not that special because every high school has at least one poet. And, then as you get older and you see what other people are doing, and, you begin to realize what a vast world it is, even just within the arts, and how many people are doing amazing, wild things. And so, I could take it as, wow, I'm not that great, or I could take it as, wow, there's so many people to learn from, and I can get better and better all the time by studying what other people are doing and applying that to my own work.
Absolutely. Would you tell us, when did you start writing poetry? You mentioned high school.
Actually, My first poem was when I was about 7 or 8 years old.
Mm.
I grew up. My household did not have a TV for a lot of the time when I was growing up. So we watched TV when we could get it, but then my parents were always trying to find ways to entertain us and keep us out of their hair. My dad worked at a company where he did a lot of scientific work and constructing of things. So one summer I worked with him for an example, and I helped him build a radar array of dipoles for the US Navy for an installation they were putting in to pick up radar signals and radio signals. And so, he was doing heavy duty scientific stuff. And at the time I was a little child, it was where, they'd started doing computer printouts on the accordion paper. And when they got done with the accordion paper, they were just throwing it out. And so my dad was like, this is wasteful. And he would bring home these stacks of used accordion paper and was like, here's a pencil, draw something or write something on the other side. Don't waste the paper. Very, very old school New Englander, make do with what you've got. And so I remember sitting out under an apple tree over by the cow pasture. And I had this, this 3-ring binder full of accordion paper.
Mm.
And I was just like, we did poems in school. Maybe I should try writing a poem. And so see if I can remember my first poem. Once long ago, when the earth was young, a bee had sorrow and the earth was stung. With a giant bellow, the universe rung. When a bee had sorrow and the earth was stung. So you can see that I was doing weird stuff right from the beginning. But that was the start of it. And no one told me that this was a terrible idea. So no one stopped me, and so here we are.
That's a brilliant, beautiful poem.
Well, thank you.
And you remember it.
Well, it's very short, so it has that going for it.
Oh, it has more than that going for it. Oh my gosh, that's really, it feels faded. It feels synchronous. It feels like whatever else it was you had to move through, there was a pull through being made possible for you. And I wanted to ask, when did you start writing speculative poetry? And I could see the bee poem as both speculative and or pastoral. Um, there are questions that I had to ask you that your very reading answered, because I was definitely going to ask you if you wrote any crochet poems or about the fiber arts. And then I scribbled that note to myself, and you did. Um, so let's talk about, how do you decide what to write about? And before you answer that, I'm going to transition, because I've been anxiously awaiting another expectation that you grew within me, which was for the museum poems, that series that I was hoping to see and read more of. And this is in another direction entirely. So back to the question, how do you decide what you're going to write about? And then please tell me about the fate of the fabulous museum poems.
Well, to start with the museum poems, I haven't forgotten them. They need more work, so I need to go back and work on those. The fairy tales for angry children was just something that was just very immediate in my heart and my mind. And so, as with a lot of my poems, I started writing as a way to vent my feelings. And also, to begin with, kind of a way to keep them at a remove, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, speculative poems for a long time filled that role for me, that if I was talking about spaceships, I could also talk about things that I was feeling, but in a way that it was distant enough that I didn't necessarily have to feel all the pain, and wouldn't necessarily, be writing what one poet I know calls nerve-ending poetry.
Yes.
Which we all do, but those ones I tend to kind of keep to myself because I know they're not necessarily good poems. But they're poems that I need to write to get something out of me and onto the page. So I tend to be somewhat random in the sense that this is what's moving me right now. This is what I'm exploring right now. And I still have all the museum poems. And once I kind of work through what I'm working through now, then I'll go back. I think one of the things I've learned is that it takes time to let the poems percolate. I tend to write very fast, but then I've learned that it's not enough to write them and just send them out into the world. Some poems come out fully formed, but others, they need that time. I need to figure out what I really mean to say and how to hone it so that it says the thing that I want it to say. So then it's just a matter of, well, what's inspiring? And I have a file. I have pictures on my phone of artwork that I find fascinating. I've got one of this cool sculpture that it's like a centaur, but a deer instead of a horse. And the man has this great set of antlers.
Mm.
But it's also almost not skeletal, but it's like you can see the sinews. And so it's got this amazing vibe that's nature, but unnatural. And I haven't done anything with it yet, but I will. I've got it stashed. So I want to constantly be learning and growing as a poet, and that means writing a lot. And some things succeed and some things don't. And I just have to. I find that inspiration works best when you make yourself available to it.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. So say again where people can find you as we are in our last 60 seconds.
I am on Facebook still. I have an account on Bluesky, so that's writer Jen Crow dot bsky.social. And I also have a Patreon, which is Poetry from a Crow. So those are probably the best places to meet up with me. I want to start blogging again, but that is not something I've had the energy to do yet. So
That's a lot of writing.
it is. It is.
Jennifer Crow, thank you so much for this fabulous journey, for sharing this incredible new work, Fairy Tales for Angry Children. And none of the children you told us about were angry.
No, that's me. I'm the angry one. I'm the angry one. But thank you so much, Akua. It's always great to meet up with you and talk poetry. It's been so much fun. Thank you.
It's been delightful for all of us listening too. I urge everyone to look for Jennifer's wonderful work. As you heard, it's fabulous, it's moving, it's evocative. And please join us next week as Starburst continues with Linda Addison. Again, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Be
Thank you.
well and peace.